So today we're going to talk about one particular area that I have totally changed up the way I do things in the garden and why. I feel like gardening is an ever-changing sport, if you will, and all of us become better at it, and we realize different parts of it that are important to us as we go over the years, and I have definitely found that about myself. So today we're going to talk about one particular area that I have totally changed up the way I do things in the garden and why. So it used to be that with gardening I was just concerned about the outcome, the amount of harvest, the amount of food, and all of that, don't get me wrong, is extremely important. But I've gotten to the point that I realize I spend so much time in the garden that I want it to look great too. So the appearance of the garden itself has started to really matter to me. On top of that, just the overall design aspect, I have a lot of fun with it. Every year I slightly change it, slightly tweak it. It gets a little better in my opinion every year. And that is part of what gets me through the long hard winter, is planning what the garden is going to look like the following year and the total design of it. So if you can have fun while you're planning it, and if you can enjoy your time in the garden while you're in there because it looks so fantastic, then why not spend a little more effort on the overall appearance of your vegetable garden? That's my theory. So something that became really important to me as I evolved with how I wanted my garden to look was the mulching of it. I really wanted to have distinct rows, and I really wanted them to be as simple as far as weed-free as I could, and I wanted them to look good. You know, I sometimes think about the Mayans, who they had those, I think it was the Mayans, they had those really unique mounds, and they made all kinds of designs like serpents and things with their mounds that only would have been understandable from above. And of course there weren't airplanes, I mean, at least that we know of, way back in ancient time. So I sometimes think of that, I don't know how many people are going to see my garden from above, but it matters to me what it looks like, and the mulching is a big part of that. Of course, you have plenty of options with how you want to mulch your garden. You could use grass clippings. It's a great free way to mulch around your vegetables. You could also use sawdust or wood chips. They're both perfectly fine options. I steer away from them for a few reasons. Mainly, they're much better to use in a situation that it is going to be in the same location every year. So if you have set aisles and set rows in your garden, then it might be a good thing to consider sawdust or wood chips. And if you put down a nice layer of newspaper and then cover that with your sawdust or your wood chips, you're going to have what feels like fine carpet that you're walking on in the aisles and rows of your garden. So it's a great choice. One thing you want to be cautious of if you do use sawdust is it's this crazy thing that the bacteria that will decompose your sawdust eats up and requires a lot of nitrogen. So if you have soil that could be prone to having a nitrogen deficiency, then you might want to steer away from using sawdust as a mulch. On the other hand, a good factor to the sawdust and the wood chips would be that they are adding fiber back into your soil. And grass clippings are good because, like I said, they're totally free, and all of these things are organic, and the grass is going to break down rather quickly, so that's a good factor. What I don't like about using grass is it's green. It takes a long time for it to dry, and I find that when I'm watering the garden a lot, or if it's been raining, the grass is really slimy and wet, and I don't want to be slipping around in my garden. I also just think it doesn't cover as well because the grass is coming out of the lawnmower and it's just smaller, right? It's not these long pieces of dried grass that I get in my bales of hay. So for me, my favorite choice to use for mulching is hay that I get from a local farmer. I do want to give you a really big precaution to keep in mind if you're going to use hay. If you can, get it from a source that you know, and a reliable source that you can talk to and you can ask them, how has this been treated? Because you absolutely can do serious damage to your garden if you're using hay that's been treated with chemicals. It's kind of obvious, right? And you really don't want the chemicals around the food that you're going to be eating. So for our hay, I get it from a local farmer, and I know him personally, I know how he treats his fields, and he only uses wood ash or manure to fertilize his fields. I love that because both of those things are fantastic for my garden, right? So in the end, I don't like the grass because it's hard to walk on and not as good at covering and not as pleasing to the eye, in my opinion. And I don't like the wood chips and the sawdust because I want to be able from year to year to completely change my design. Even though I have these set walls that I can move for my climbing beans, I can put them both on the same side of the garden, or I can totally change where they go. So I don't even have to have a center aisle in a future year if I want to change up the overall design. So I like being able to do that, and I don't want to have to worry about the sawdust or the wood chips being in my way, having to be moved for future designs of the garden. Another caution with sawdust, if you're not careful to keep it totally separate from the dirt of your garden, you can find that your garden soil is much less absorbent of water. Because when that sawdust gets mixed in with the dirt, well, the sawdust isn't going to soak in the water. So you might have a problem that your vegetables aren't getting and retaining the water that they need if you're not careful and you mix in the sawdust with your soil. So since I spend a whole lot of time in the garden, partially because it needs the attention and the work if I want to have a lot of great food in the end of the summer, but also partially because I just love being in the garden, I want to make it as pleasing as I can. Honestly, I feel like it's a retreat. I feel like it's a mini vacation that I get to go on every day. So this year, I had laid out the hay in a really thin layer to decide where I wanted it because I wasn't quite sure about a few things and if I wanted to mulch certain aisles. I had trouble with squash beetles last year, and squash beetles do not, let's see, how do I say this? Squash beetles thrive in a mulched area. So I wanted to be sure where I was placing the mulch was not anywhere that I was afraid there were going to be mulch beetles, squash beetle problems. Anyway, so I laid down a thin layer. Now that I've decided this is definitely the layout that I want, I'm ready to go back over it and put a really thick layer of the straw, because the thicker the hay, of course, the less likely that the weeds are going to get enough sunlight to thrive. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm going to go back through and lay down a thicker layer, a deep layer of my hay where I have just a thin layer right now. Separate my big bale of hay and I just carry it like maybe half a flake at a time to where I want to spread it out. And I love, compared to using grass clippings, how it is just so long and just does a more effective job of covering the area where I'm going to be laying it. And when I'm all done, I like to go over and stomp it down a little bit. Of course, in the days and weeks ahead, just the foot traffic in the garden is going to get that nice and flat, like a little carpet walkway. So I hope I inspired you a little bit to think about your garden design and to make it something that you really love and that you love spending time in.